Back in 1988, a horror movie titled The Return of the Ghost was released. Featuring its notorious evil doll, it not only shattered horror film box office records but also became an unforgettable childhood memory for countless individuals. The story begins with a fugitive on the run from the police. Realizing his end is near, he casts a cruel curse upon the officers pursuing him and those who would capture him. He vows to take revenge in the next life, swearing to kill them all. As he collapses near a toy rack, he notices the dolls beside him. Charles's eyes light up with an idea, and he places his hands on their heads, determined to transfer his soul into one of the dolls. Charles, being not only a wanted man but also a sorcerer, begins chanting incantations. As he does so, the sky above the toy store fills with clouds, and thunder rumbles. Suddenly, with a flash, he casts his curse. Lightning and thunder crackle, and a bolt of lightning strikes the toy store, sealing his fate. The whole toy shop exploded violently on Charles, and Charles, not surprisingly, died on the spot, and the doll he had possessed disappeared. The next morning, a boy in town saw an advertisement for a human doll on TV, and Andy dreamed of having a talking doll, but her mother could not afford anything so expensive, and such an elaborate plot would require a good device. Knowing that Karen had always favored Andy, she told him that there were people in the neighborhood who sold that kind of stuff on the street. But what he didn't realize was that the reason the dealer was selling the dolls at such a low price was because the dealer had picked up these dolls himself. The particular one he purchased was the very one possessed by Charles. To avoid revealing his identity, Charles had been pretending to be just an ordinary doll and had taken on the name Chucky. That evening, Karen had to work overtime, so she asked her friend to stay at her house and look after Andy. Later that night, the aunt wanted Andy to sleep in her room, but Andy refused because Chucky wanted to finish watching the news program. Chucky had seen a news report on TV about how he had been shot. To learn more about the child fire and the policeman's whereabouts, he revealed to Andy that he was actually a living doll. This revelation thrilled Andy, but her aunt was not interested in keeping her awake at all, so she held Andy in her arms, keeping her close with the other arm. Chucky's arm was still on the bottom of his shoe. She took them both into the bedroom and then Andy started to clean the kitchen, but then the sound of a television came to her ears. Auntie turned her head and found Chucky sitting on the sofa reading the news. She naturally thought it was Andy playing a prank on her. So she threw Chucky into the room once again and reminded Andy to stop playing pranks. She was really upset. After all, she hadn't done anything at all. But Andy could tell that she would never believe it. But Andy could see that Auntie would never believe that Chucky had done anything, so she waited for Auntie to leave and quietly reminded Chucky not to upset Auntie anymore. But unbeknownst to Auntie, Auntie wasn't the only one who was upset. Chucky, a murderer, was furious, and she was even tempted to kill someone in order to vent her anger. The spilled flowers seemed like the work of a chaotic enemy, but he didn't plan to defend the child. He just wanted the flower off the floor quickly. Suddenly, a strange noise came from the window, and Auntie checked for anything unusual. While wondering, a man struck her head with a hammer, causing her to stumble back, break the glass, and fall down the stairs. When Karen Vinson got home, she saw many police officers in the living room gathering evidence. The investigator in charge was GB. Charles's officer, Mike. He noticed a child's footprints in the flower and suspected Andy. Yet, Andy didn't have shoes matching the prints. As confusion grew, Andy realized Chucky's shoes had prints on the soles, and he had been killed. After the police left, Andy decided to tell his mom the secret that Chucky, unlike other dolls, was alive. He also told her that his aunt died because she messed with Chucky, which made Andy's mom think it was not only fantasy but also question if her son had mental issues. The next morning, Andy took Chucky to school as usual. But this time, he snuck out after his mom left, and following Chucky's instructions, took a tram to an old building in the countryside. Andy suddenly needed to use the bathroom, so he placed Chucky on a chair. When he came back, Chucky was gone. Chucky knew from last night's news that his accomplice hadn't been caught by the police, so he guessed he must have hidden here to avoid them. Here. Chucky entered the room and went straight to the kitchen, turned on the gas, and then deliberately made a noise to make it look as if a hostile had entered the kitchen. Chucky's careful planning led to the opening of the kitchen door, which instantly set off a gunshot that exploded the entire building, and Andy, who was now in the vicinity of the scene of the crime, was naturally taken back to the police station for questioning. When the police asked him why he was at the scene of the crime, Andy told them that he was compelled by the dolls to go there in order to prove his innocence. He tried to get Chucky to talk in front of the public, but no matter how hard he pressed, nothing happened. Andy was on the verge of breaking down, because he never imagined that Chucky, whom he considered his best friend, would sell himself at the critical moment, as he did today, and that Chucky would be the one to sell himself out. In this particular situation, Karen could do nothing but watch as her son was taken to a mental hospital for a thorough examination. After she returned home with Chucky, all alone, she hoped more than anyone else that her son was telling the truth. So, she began to threaten the dolls, demanding they talk to her. However, Chucky never uttered anything other than the pre-programmed phrases he was designed to say, which was incredibly frustrating for Karen. From her perspective, it seemed wiser to quickly get rid of this calamity rather than continue dealing with the string of odd events that had plagued her family ever since she bought this doll for her son. It seemed prudent to dispose of this disaster as soon as possible. But when she reached for Chucky's box, something unexpectedly fell out of it. Karen looked down and was suddenly gripped by a cold sweat. It was the doll's batteries. This discovery meant that Chucky was operating without any power source, which was utterly impossible. To confirm her suspicions, Karen approached Chucky and picked him up as if nothing unusual had occurred. She then cautiously opened the battery compartment, and the outcome was that the battery compartment was open, revealing the batteries had been removed. The room was empty, and Karen was so scared that the doll fell. When she dared to pick up Chucky, he turned back into a normal doll. No matter how much she threatened him, he stayed silent, as if nothing had happened. This angered Karen, determined to prove her son's innocence, so she took Chucky to the fireplace and threatened to burn him if he didn't speak. During their confrontation, Chucky bit her shoulder so hard that he couldn't maintain the act any longer and chose to flee. As Karen chased him downstairs, there was no sign of the ghostly figures on the street. She went to Mike, the case officer, showed him her bite marks, and explained what happened, hoping he'd help free Andy from the hospital. However, after hearing the story, Mike felt too sick to understand. But when he heard Chucky's real name was Charles, he remembered the criminal he chased recently was also named Charles. Although the news said Charles was killed by him, only Mike knew Charles was struck by a strange lightning bolt. While driving home, a doll's head emerged from the back seat. Suddenly, Chucky viciously strangled Mike's neck with cables. Desperate, Mike grabbed the cigarette lighter to burn Chucky's face. Chucky screamed and went under the seat, pulling out a dagger to stab Mike, who had to dodge both the attack and bullets. After this incident, Mike couldn't help but believe Karen's words. Following an investigation, he discovered that Charles was nicknamed Chucky. To uncover the reason why Charles's soul had been transferred into the dolls, Mike and Karen visited his home and learned that Charles had been practicing with a wizard. In their quest to find a way to destroy Chucky, the two decided to collaborate with a witch. However, they were unaware that Chucky had already approached the witch first, seeking to understand why he could still feel pain despite no longer being human. The witch's response was unacceptable to him. The longer you stay in that body, the more human you will become, which implies that Chucky will eventually transform into a doll-sized human being. Naturally, he doesn't want to accept that fate. The two of them were on the run and asked the witch to tell them how to solve the problem, but the witch had already disapproved of his wrongdoings and refused to help. But then Chucky stole the witch's life toy, and if the witch was hurt, the witch would be hurt too, so Chucky broke his arms and legs, and the witch collapsed to the ground in pain, and when Chucky was about to stab himself with his own knife, he had to tell him the secret that would make Chucky human, and that was Andy, who was only 6 years old, although he was still a young boy. Although he was still a child, it was better than being a doll for the rest of his life. Chucky did not keep his promise and plunged the knife into the doll's chest when Mike and Karen arrived at the wizard's house. The wizard was already dying before he died. He told Karen that the only way to stop Chucky from hurting the boy was to stab him through the heart after realizing that his son was in danger. He immediately went to the psychiatric hospital together with Mike, but they were again in the hospital for the last time. Late. Luckily for him, Andy had seized the chance to escape from the hospital while he was killing the doctor. Karen guessed that her son was probably at home right now. Andy managed to flee from the hospital and went directly to his house, where he blocked the door with furniture to keep Chucky out. However, he never anticipated that Chucky would enter through the stove's chimney, and he quickly spotted him. Chucky didn't expect Andy to have the courage to strike him with a stick, but sadly, Andy was no match for Chucky and was knocked unconscious in every moment. Right after, Chucky placed his hand on Andy's head and recited the soul transfer mantra once again. A dark cloud rose from the ceiling of the apartment building, and Mike, who had already reached the bottom of the building, saw the familiar sight and realized that the situation was dire. At Karen's house entrance, he dashed in, disrupting Chucky's spell, making Chucky furious. Chucky attacked, stabbing Mike's leg and knocking him out. As Chucky was about to finish him, Karen fired to save Nick, but her gun jammed, forcing her to flee. Struggling at the fireplace, Karen quickly saved Nick by shoving Chucky in. Andy ignited a fire, and together they charged Chucky. Though Chucky seemed defeated, he attacked again. Karen raised her gun, and this time it worked. She fired 3 shots, breaking Chucky into pieces. Chucky appeared as dead as a doornail, and by that moment, Mike's fellow police officers had arrived at the scene. When they discovered that the 3 of them had been pursued and killed by the dolls, they considered it a miracle. They even decided to take Chucky's doll's brains for examination to prove that it was impossible for these dolls to survive. The officers were astounded by the dolls coming back to life, and it was only then that they recalled the wizard's words, "The only way to kill Chucky is to kill him." The sole method to kill Chucky was to shoot him in the heart. So, Mike aimed his pistol and fired at Chucky's heart. However, they never anticipated that Chucky would return to life in the near future. How would Andy manage to escape from Chucky's pursuit? Well, that's it for today's story. I'm Yasser Arafat. Subscribe for more interesting horror videos, and we'll see you next time.